The office smelled like expensive leather and polished glass, a smell that tried to convince anyone who walked in that money had a scent. Floor-to-ceiling windows spilled sunlight across a conference table big enough to stage a battle. A logo on the far wall glinted MathCore Industries. Men in tailored suits stood behind a man in an even better suit, the kind of suit that looked like it paid taxes for you. He leaned over the table, jaw set, eyes sharp as a knife. Across from him stood a woman in a plain uniform, her hands still damp from wiping down the reception counter. The yellow gloves tugged halfway up her forearms. At her side, a boy no older than 10 clung to the straps of a faded backpack. The backpack had a bright yellow cartoon face on it, the kind of innocence money couldn't buy. He laughed, the sound bouncing off the marble. "Fix this and I'll give you my mansion," he said, amusement laced with scorn. The suit fit him, but his kindness did not. The room held its breath. The woman's expression did not change. Her son stared up at the man with careful small eyes, the way a child measures a storm. It started as a ripple and had grown into a flood. MathCore's new predictive platform, the thing investors had called revolutionary, was failing. It miscalculated resource allocation, misread demand patterns, and worse, it made decisions that hurt small suppliers. Stocks slipped, headlines whispered, and the board wanted results. Now, the CEO wanted a miracle, and when miracles were sparse, the theatrics were plentiful. "You heard him," someone murmured, part disdain, part curiosity. She straightened the gloves, passed a glance over the computer monitor that had been giving him trouble. The error message seemed plain to anyone who actually touched things rather than sat behind them. An algorithm had been fed bias by oversampling a particular dataset. The model had been trained on convenience, not context. It favored scale over fairness. The math was clean for those who owned the scale, ugly for those who didn't. "You don't know what you're offering," the woman said softly, a calm that didn't need to shout. The boy's brow furrowed. He'd watched his mother clean boards and scrub crumbs from chairs for years. He'd watched her leave before dawn and return after the sun had gone to sleep. He watched the same faces parade through the front doors, some kind, some cruel, and he learned things. He learned to listen to small sounds, the hum of a server, the sigh of a printer, the whispered panic of an intern who'd missed a deadline. In a world that favored diplomas on glossy paper, he learned by watching how systems broke. He learned that things often failed because no one bothered to ask why the quiet people lost out. "Let me look at it," the boy said. The room made the same mistake the world makes with children. It underestimated him. He was small, mop-haired, and spoke like a child. The CEO's smile sharpened. "This is company property. Kids don't tinker with company property." "They don't, usually," the boy replied. "But sometimes kids see what adults ignore." The CEO considered the boy like one considers a trinket. Interesting, probably worthless. "Fine," he said. 10 minutes. If you can't, you leave. If you can, you get nothing but the satisfaction of knowing a fool tried. His voice was a slap dressed as a joke. The woman's jaw tightened. She remembered other humiliations, other times when wealth used humiliation as a sport. She remembered telling her son to keep his head down, to be invisible. That was survival. But now her son stood in front of a crowd that expected entertainment, and he had a mind like a steel trap. You could sanitize a server room and still not clean the rot from decisions. He had ideas. They sat him at a workstation. The interface was glossy and smug. It condescended to explain error messages and corporate euphemisms. He tapped keys with fingers that knew small displays and cracked phones from the neighborhood repair shop. He looked for fingerprints, for habits of data, for where the model learned to choose winners and ignore the rest. The first thing he saw was not code but context. MathCore's dataset had been trained mostly on big city transactions, high-ticket clients and suppliers with storefronts that matched glossy brochures. Rural vendors, informal collectives, and small family-run workshops were absent. The model amplified what it saw, rewarding scale and punishing smallness. It recommended contracts to suppliers who already had many contracts. It failed to diversify. It turned a tool meant to manage resources into a machine that consolidated power. He dug deeper. There were metrics flagged as high: conversion rates, lifetime value, acquisition velocity. Nostalgia in the charts, he thought. The algorithm chased growth as if growth were justice. It needed balance, fairness embedded into its loss function, not as an afterthought. A simple bias correction could reduce disparity while keeping profitability in sight. He scribbled on a napkin, a frantic little map of logic, an outline of how to reweight samples, and introduce a fairness constraint. 10 minutes became 20. The crowd shifted, curiosity outweighing cruelty, for now. He typed like someone had taught him at the elbow of a cracked laptop and a teacher who couldn't afford a graduation gown. He rerouted a few parameters, adjusted sampling weights, introduced an optimizer that penalized disparity in supplier selection, not unlike turning down the volume on a single instrument in a bad orchestra. Then he rerouted a small module, instead of ranking suppliers by predicted revenue alone, ranked by a composite score that included reliability, geographical diversity, and a fairness index. He hit enter. The monitor blinked. The error resolved into a new set of recommendations, this time, alongside the obvious winners, smaller vendors with solid delivery histories and fair pricing crept up the list. The outputs looked different, more balanced, more sensible. The room noticed. Investors could not see the human behind the math, but they could see the chart, and the chart smiled. The CEO's amusement flickered. He leaned forward, as if to smell the work. "What did you do?" The boy shrugged like it was nothing. "I made it care about more things." The CEO scoffed, the sound brittle now. "You patched a bug, that's nice. You didn't redesign the architecture, did you?" "I didn't need to," the boy said. "You just needed to stop pretending the data told the whole story." Word spread through the building like wildfire. A junior analyst with a free afternoon came over and peered at the screen, then at the boy. "My God," he breathed. He fixed the bias in the training set. They cheered, polite and shocked, a round of applause for a child who'd made math do what people expected of it, be fairer. The CEO's face moved through shades. Pride at having his empire saved, embarrassment that someone with a mopboard and yellow gloves had solved a problem his engineers had sweated over for weeks. And finally a calculation. Opportunity. "Bring him to my private lab," he said, voice honeyed. "There are internships, there are scholarships, there are possibilities." The woman's heart beat faster. She had heard those promises before. Promises were windows into a room where people kept light on for as long as they needed to watch someone else work. She knew the smell of false hope. But her son's eyes shone with a light that was dangerous and irresistible. Dangerous because the world loved to commodify brilliance. She reminded him with a look to be cautious, to remember they had each other. The CEO staged it like a gift. Press releases flashed within hours. MathCore finds prodigious talent, community outreach, corporate responsibility. The headlines glowed. The boy stood on a pedestal built of public relations, and offers poured in: schools, mentors, internships. He accepted a mentorship at the company, where he would be fed more than snacks, resources, tutors, access to problems that paid in real money. Days turned into weeks. The boy learned quickly, a sponge on a mission. Engineers taught him advanced statistics. Data scientists showed him models that could see through noise. He asked fierce questions. He did not accept glib answers. When he suggested modifications, he explained how the changes would alter outcomes for the smallest vendors. He began to carry the stories of those vendors with him like talismans. How a family in the valley barely made payroll until they got a single fair contract. How a women-led co-op had all its bids ignored because their website was plain. He turned numbers into people. The CEO watched this transformation with a new hunger. The company's stocks rose. The board clapped. The CEO found opportunities to be photographed with the boy. Cupcakes and certificates. A mansion-shaped metaphor dangled like a carrot. But power is slippery. The more the boy's work began to shift company policy toward fairness, the more it threatened the status quo that had made the CEO millions. Adjusting algorithms to prevent consolidation reduced short-term gains from existing conglomerates. Clients complained. The board grew uneasy. There were threats in hushed hallways, phone calls with pointed suggestions. Money and conservation of its own kind can be very convincing. One evening, the CEO called a closed meeting. Cameras were not invited. He offered the boy a contract, a salary, a lab, equity. He walked the boy through a vision that sounded like kindness wrapped in leverage. "We can do so much together," he said. "With your talent and my reach, we can make the world better." The boy listened, quiet as a winter pond. He had learned to read offers the way he read datasets. It was not that the CEO wanted to help. It was that the CEO wanted to control the help. The boy thought of the marginal vendors, of promises made to mothers in the valley, of the woman who scrubbed the reception counter and still put food on the table. He thought about the mansion and how tempting it sounded when whispered into the ear of someone who had dreamt of a bed that didn't sag, of curtains that closed without sequins of hole. "I'll help," the boy said. "If the rules are clear, if fairness stays a priority and not a headline, if there's transparency and community oversight." The CEO smiled. "A practice thing." "Of course," he said, "of course." Months passed. The boy insisted on checks and balances. He wanted third-party audits, community advisory members, a fund that guaranteed a minimum percentage of contracts go to small suppliers. The CEO nodded through meetings, then pushed back when investors moaned. The board suggested compromises, euphemisms for cutting corners. The CEO's smile hardened. It was then that the boy made a choice that upset the chessboard for everyone. He had learned how to code a model, but he had also learned how to make people see. He created not just models but an open dashboard, a tool anyone could understand. It displayed not only profit projections but distribution metrics, supplier diversity scores, and clear explanations of how decisions were made. It invited suppliers to submit feedback, to annotate data with their experiences. It included stories attached to transactions, a small human touch that made the numbers live and accountable. He released the dashboard to the public. The reaction was tsunami level. Journalists praised transparency, small vendors rejoiced, regulators leaned closer, investors panicked. The CEO's PR team scrambled. "You can't just publish internal tools," they warned. "You'll ruin negotiation leverage." The woman, watching from a distance, felt both terror and pride. The boy had not asked for permission. He had done what he believed was right. He'd said, in code and in courage, that power should be visible, that people deserved to know how algorithms made choices that affected their lives. The CEO called him to his office. It was a scene of thunder and velvet. "You've jeopardized years of work," he said. "You've made enemies." "I made the right choice," the boy said. "Right is not always safe. There were consequences. Lawsuits, threats, a smear campaign that tried to paint the boy as reckless. The CEO played a dangerous game, negotiating deals to keep the company afloat while coaxing the boy into quiet compliance. But something had changed that couldn't be reversed. The public had tasted transparency, and it was hungry for more. Community groups formed, small suppliers organized, regulators started to ask hard questions. MathCore's initial market advantage shifted. Some larger clients left, unwilling to operate under the new scrutiny, but new partnerships formed with organizations that valued equity. The company's trajectory changed, no longer a straight climb but a jagged road with both embarrassments and genuine wins. One night, well after the headlines had cooled and the boy had grown into a young man, the CEO stopped by the reception desk. The woman looked up. No cameras, no audience. He handed her an envelope. "I meant what I said," he murmured. "Not the mansion. Your son deserved better. This is for you." She opened the envelope at home, hands shaking. There was a sum enough to pay off debts, to buy a small house with a door that closed tight and a kitchen that didn't whisper. But the real gift was not the money. The real gift had two parts, the freedom it bought her and the recognition it brought to the work she'd done for years without spectacle. She accepted it, but she also knew it came with conditions. Money could heal, but it could not replace the dignity that the public had helped restore. When she went back to MathCore the next day, there was no fanfare. The boy, now a young man, had set up a nonprofit that trained kids from neighborhoods like theirs in data ethics and machine learning. He taught the children not just how to code, but how to ask the right questions, whose voices are missing, who gains, who loses. He taught them to build tools that respect humanity. The CEO watched from a distance as the young man spoke at community centers, as small vendors used open dashboards to negotiate fair contracts, as regulators cited the company's new standards. He had lost some sheen, but he had also learned something harder. When the people affected by decisions are given a seat at the table becomes a different thing. Years later, when the young man stood in a conference room of his own and spoke about technology with both fire and mercy, someone asked him whether he regretted the fight, the fame, the moments when compromise tempted him. He thought of his mother, of her steady hands and patient eyes, of the scrubbed counters and the quiet lessons. He thought of the CEO, a complicated man who had both harmed and eventually been changed by that harm. He smiled. No, he said, not regret. We learned that courage is contagious, and fairness is not a favor, it's a choice. Outside, beyond the glass, the city moved. Shops opening, buses coughing off to their ruts, people making small promises to their own futures. Inside, algorithms hummed, but now they had a new instruction: look for the overlooked, include the unseen, measure the stories. The mansion remained a metaphor, a glittering symbol of what people assume money can fix. The real change lived in smaller, quieter places, in a contract won by a family co-op, in a child's first laptop, in a mother who no longer had to wear her pride like one more thing to scrub. The boy who had been underestimated had grown into a man who made systems answerable to humanity, and in doing so, he gave the people around him a different kind of home, a place where fairness, not fortune, decided the terms.